Good afternoon. This is the daily weather briefing for Tuesday, February 28th, 2017. This is a special severe weather edition. We have some potentially dangerous severe weather coming up today, and we want to discuss that. So let's get started in our current weather conditions so we can kind of take a look at what's going on out there at this point in time. Not a lot going on in the West Coast right now. Some cooler temperatures from the Northwest down through most of California. Temperatures are seasonable at this point in time. And even on the East Coast of the United States, weather is pretty nice, generally across most of the United States. The coldest weather right now is across North Dakota and South Dakota, with temperatures still in the teens and the low teens, around 16 Z this morning. We have some storm system that's coming out of the west now into the central plains. We already have a large area swath of clouds and scattered showers and some thunderstorms. Not a lot of heavy precipitation at this point in time. The main disturbance is out here, and this is associated with a broad southwestern flow aloft that's producing these showers and thunderstorms over a very warm, moist air mass. Looking at the watch warning map in the northwestern portion of the United States, we have some winter weather advisories still in effect and a winter storm warning. Some flood advisories continuing across California, which will continue because of the melting snow and the warmer temperatures. Some flood advisories here that just came about in Arizona with some winter weather advisories in the northern portion of the state. Winter storm warnings in Colorado and in winter weather advisories there for some heavy snow. And high area of winds warnings and red flag warnings across western portions of Oklahoma and Texas and most of New Mexico associated with the storm systems coming out in very dry air. And we do also have a flash flood watch now in effect for the Ohio River Valley associated with this storm system that will be coming up in periods of heavy rains coming into that area. Looking at the infrared satellite picture, again, we saw this earlier. We've got most of the activity is currently in the central plains. A lot of this is high level clouds, not a lot of precipitation falling out here in the central plains because of the dry air. But there are some lower clouds out here and some scattered showers and thunderstorms, especially in Indiana, out here in West Virginia and Ohio, into Tennessee, down into portions of Alabama. Looking at the radar, we do see that it being indicated here. We do have a couple of severe thunderstorm warnings. These are no longer in effect now at the time of this video, but we did have some pretty strong thunderstorms with some large hail out here in Wisconsin. Some more scattered showers and thunderstorms kind of peppered along and associated with some kind of an upper level wave out here in the eastern portion of the United States. And then some virga mostly out here in Oklahoma, and then some heavier showers and some snow out here in Arizona and up into Colorado. Now we're going to look at the severe weather analysis now. Before we do that, we're going to look at yesterday. And mostly yesterday we had an isolated wind event in Pennsylvania, but we also had some hail reports out here around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But nothing super significant at this point in time, and it was just kind of a precursor of what's going to be happening later today. Now, looking at today's severe weather outlook, we're not going to focus on tomorrow because tomorrow there is an enhanced risk. But today we are going to look at the specifics of today's severe weather outlook. And this has been upgraded since we received this. And we now have a large, moderate risk of severe thunderstorms and possible tornadoes associated from about Indianapolis up to just around Peoria, Illinois, just to the west of St. Louis, down to just north of Jonesboro, Arkansas, over to Louisville. And this is the area where we see the greatest potential risk by SBC as the higher risk for severe weather. Surrounding that is a pretty broad, expansed area for enhanced severe weather, and then an area of slight risk of severe weather that extends all the way from Akron, Ohio, down to around Tulsa, Oklahoma, just north of Shreveport. Now, the one thing to note here is that severe thunderstorms do not look at these lines, and this is where the area most potential for severe thunderstorms within a given point of about 25 miles of a given point. And so that's something to keep in mind when we're looking at this, that tornadoes and severe thunderstorms do not observe these lines. Looking at the tornado potential, and there is quite a significant potential for severe thunderstorms and tornadoes. We have a 15% chance of a tornado possibly being found just to the northwest or northeast of Louisville through Evansville down to Paducah, just north of Jonesboro, Arkansas. And with this in the area, this is where we expect the higher potential of stronger tornadoes that could take place. In the yellow area, again, there's a 10% chance, so that's quite a large area also. And again, that's associated with a within 25 miles of given point. That's where the highest potential for tornadic activity would take place today and tonight. Now, looking at the visible satellite, we can see here again there's quite a bit of cloudiness over the warm sector at this point. We are beginning to see some general breaks in clouds out here across the western portion of that area, especially just to the south of Pine Bluff into Shreveport and Tyler, Texas, and then some areas around Springfield, Missouri, although we're beginning to see some scattered towering cumulus in that area. We go a little bit further north, and then there's some breaks all the way up into Des Moines, Iowa, within the warm sector. East of that, though, we have quite a thick cloud band of clouds all the way from Michigan south into Alabama with some scattered showers and thunderstorms in that area. So this area is not going to see a lot of insolation today, whereas the western portions will see that. Looking at the dew points, one thing that we do note that's a little bit different than the last severe weather event we had is the dew points are considerably higher in the warm sector. Now, not so much over here where the moderate risk is, and that's kind of interesting to me. Dew points are quite low, from around 48 down to about 61, but there is quite a large push of warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico. Dew points are around Tyler, Texas, around 70 degrees, with a high around Springfield between 61 and 63 degrees, just south of that warm front. I think what the SPC is expecting is the strong southerly flow, low-level jet, as it increases, this warm, moist, unstable air will be shunted more towards the north and northeast into the moderate risk area later today. You can clearly see where the dry line is indicated. It's just to the west of Oklahoma City at this point in time, but there is a clear delineation between the warm, moist air to the east and the very dry air to the west, where we have all those red flag advisories taking place. Looking at the current convective available potential energy, we have values around 1400 plus joules per kilogram out here around the Tulsa area, around Springfield. And I think this is probably going to be a very prime area we're going to have to watch this afternoon. And then a little bit further to the south, we have values almost pressing up to about 2,000 joules per kilogram. That's pretty high for late February to have these kinds of values, especially, and even up to a little bit further north around St. Joseph, Missouri. We have values up to almost about 4,500, excuse me, not 4,500, about 450 joules per kilogram. That's very high for this time of year to have that. Now, looking at the 0 to 3 kilometer storm relative helicity, that's a mouthful. We have quite a bit of shear in the atmosphere. Now, the higher values are going to be found here in the gray areas, where we're going to see values pressing over 500 meters per second. But anything that's above 250 is sufficient for tornadic activity. So we're not too worried at this point that the helicity is not going to be there. It's just not super concentrated. Now, mind you, the main storm system is still in the Intermountain West, so these values are expected to increase as time goes on throughout the day. Again, we have a little bit of a concentration around here in Springfield, Missouri that we have to keep an eye on here. Now, what we've done here, instead of looking at models, I tend to focus more on looking at the raw material, the raw data, and seeing what it's going to indicate. I think models sometimes tend to overdo or underdo, and we rely too much on that. So what I'd like to do here is focus specifically on what the current values were at about 12Z this morning. And as you can see, we have a very potent, strong jet stream going across mainly the southern tier of the United States into the central portion of the United States. The key areas of the jet that we've got to look at is the left entrance and the right rear of this jet. And if you follow these along, you can see where these areas are going to be moving later on today. And again, I think we're going to have to look in this area here for the greatest potential for severe weather. Now, This area around Springfield down to Tulsa is going to be more in the anticyclonic area, but I think it could move into the left entrance region as the polar jet begins to push a little bit further towards the south as the main storm system becomes a little bit more tilted, oriented neutral, and the jet becomes a little bit more curved up this way as time goes on. Looking at the 700 millibars, again, we still have a very broad trough of, 500 millibars. We have a very broad mid-level jet across the region, as well as we have a cold air pool of trough is still out here in California and Arizona. So the main trough is still pretty far away. We have little areas, though, of cooler air that's going to be brushing by that could set off some cycles of some thunderstorms later on today. But the main trough is still way out here in the southwest. Looking at the 700 millibars and what we're looking at here is really the thermal trough, the thermal ridge, and it's pretty clear that the thermal ridge extends all the way from the southern South Dakota through Missouri, through Springfield, right along that dry line here. And then we have a little bit of a thermal ridge out here in Alabama where we could see some scattered showers and thunderstorms. But really, this is the pivotal area where we tend to see thunderstorms fire off. And again, I'm really concerned about this area here between about St. Louis and Springfield as being the prime area where we're going to see some massive thunderstorms develop, some possible supercells, and some tornadic activity develop later on this afternoon and this evening. Looking at the 850 millibar, again, you can see the delineation between the moist air and the drier air. The dry line at the 850 millibar level is pretty much around Tulsa down to Dallas-Fort Worth. Very moist axis extending all the way from Davenport, Iowa through Springfield down to Shreveport, down to Corpus Christi in this area. You have a pretty decent low-level jet here. Again, the orientation prior to the dry line, 850 millibar dry line, is directly from the south here. A little bit of a southwestern coordinate here, especially around Springfield, and then especially over Oklahoma City. So that tends to, we would probably want to see this more from the southeast to really have a more higher potential for tornadoes in this area, but still it's quite sufficient for the speeds that are there. Now looking at the lower levels of the atmosphere around the 925 millibar winds and dew points, again, the surface dew point, quite a tight gradient between Oklahoma and Tulsa here in the moisture content, and there's quite a deep slug of moisture just to the south of Springfield, Missouri, that's going to be shunted up to the north with the low-level jet here. Pretty strong winds coming off the Gulf of Mexico and Corpus Christi of about 50 knots. That'll be translating northward later today. And then another strong low-level jet max that's currently over Knoxville, Tennessee, that will be shooting off into the Ohio Valley later today. But generally, the winds are greater than 30 knots at this level, anywhere between 30, 35 to 40 knots, and it's quite sufficient for the low-level winds in this area here. Again, I think where we're looking for the greatest potentials for severe weather and probably the greatest potential for tornadic activity will be anywhere from around maybe Champaign or St. Louis down towards Springfield, Missouri. And I think Springfield, Missouri, and we'll look at their skew T-plot here in just a second here, is really kind of the prime target this afternoon and tonight, where we could see the initiation of very damaging thunderstorms and possibly tornadic thunderstorms, long-track tornadic thunderstorms later today. Now we're looking at the Lincoln, Illinois skew T-plot here, and really there's no cape at this point in time, but one thing to note here is the dry air intrusion here, and we do have quite a bit of moisture below 850 millibars. Now, even though this is not very impressive and only forecasting about 200 joules per kilogram in the cape values, the thing we have to notate here is we do have somewhat of a decent hodograph here. It's not perfect, but it's okay. Lapse rates are pretty low at this point. We like to see these around 7 to 8 or greater. 8 and greater would be excellent. Shear values are not super high at this point in time, but the potential is there for increase in the of this atmosphere to increase down the road. The one thing to note at this point in time is that we do have at the lower levels, the values are more out of the southwest. We'd like to see these more towards the southeast to have more of a directional shear issue. We're not really we kind of that's kind of our issue that we have in the Midwest at this point in time. But speed shear is not a problem. Now this is where we're looking at the greatest potential, and that's Springfield, Missouri. And as you can see, we have a very the equilibrium goes all the way up to 200 millibars here, and that means we're going to have very tall thunderstorms here with a great potential for hail. We have a very definite drier intrusion above a very moist atmosphere that's increasing in moisture up to about 700 millibars. The winds are sufficient, and there's not any chaotic winds associated in this atmosphere, so we don't have any variable wind shifts that are too terrible that could cause a messy situation. The hodograph looks pretty impressive at this point in time, and the cape is very sufficient at this point. We do have a small weak cap around the 850 millibar level that needs to erode, but that's only going to make it more explosive down the road. The lapse rates are already around 7.5 degrees Celsius per kilometer. So once those will increase as time goes on throughout the day. So I think the greatest potential for severe weather, and the only element that's kind of lacking here is again the directional shear at the lower levels. The speed shear is not a problem, so we will have fast moving thunderstorms at this point in time. The directional shear, however, is a little bit more limited, so that may have an impact on how intense the tornadoes could be, or if tornadoes can develop at this point in time. We'll have to monitor that. I do think there's going to be tornadoes today, especially out near Springfield, Missouri, maybe north and east of that area, and I think those people really need to pay close attention to that potential that's there. Because I do think there will be tornadoes. How sufficient they will be, I don't know. But you don't need a large wedge tornado to cause damage or death. So we have to be very very alert to this situation. Looking at the Little Rock, Arkansas, again, the Cape values are well more than sufficient and actually very impressive for this time of the year. We have a very prominent dry punch of air above the 700 millibars, so there's quite a bit of moisture to work with there. And the only thing is the lapse rates right now are only between 6.5 and 7 degrees Celsius per kilometer. We could like to see those a little bit higher there. The hodograph is decent. Again, we have no problems with speed shear. The directional shear is again a little bit of an issue here. And we do see a little bit of veering of winds in the mid-levels here, and low and mid-levels, so that can cause a little bit of chaotic problems when it comes to tornadic activity later on today. But again, this is at 12Z. I'm reminding you that this is at 12Z today. This is early this morning, and we already have a very ripe and unstable atmosphere between Little Rock to Springfield to about St. Louis already. Now let's look at Dallas-Fort Worth, and again we have a very prominent cap over Dallas-Fort Worth, and a very prominent, almost explosive, setup here, kind of a loaded gun scenario here. The cap here is a little bit lower, not quite as the Cape value is a little bit lower here, but again, this is at 12Z here we're talking about. Lapse rates are pretty high. The veering of the wind is a little bit better out here by Dallas-Fort Worth. So anywhere from Dallas-Fort Worth to Springfield to St. Louis, I think we could see some very intense thunderstorms that are going to have to be closely watched in those areas, especially if they go on a little bit later today. Now, one thing to note is that this cap could translate up towards Springfield and somewhat suppress some of the severe activity later today, and we could have kind of a lull and then a rebuild later on tonight. So all in all, let's look at the severe weather potential. Speed shear, again, we said is not a problem. Surface-based CAPE, very impressive for this time of the year. Very strong low-level jet, mid-level jet, and upper-level jet. So that goes right along with the speed shear. Clearing in the warm sector, we have some clearing out there along the western portion of the Mississippi River. EHI values right now are roughly around 1.5. They are expected to increase later today. Now, here are the cons for the severe weather potential. The cons right now is we do have an issue with some directional shear. It's more unidirectional. Especially when we get into lower levels, and that will have somewhat of an inhibition problem later today and tonight when it comes to tornadic activity. But again, you've got the little microscale and mesoscale parameters that could have an impact later on today, like boundary levels, boundary layers, and boundary lines and so forth, that can cause all kinds of different havoc across the area. And then the trough itself will be coming across mostly. Right now it's positive. There will be somewhat of a neutral axis associated with it, but we're not going to go negative by any means whatsoever on this trough. So that's going to have somewhat of a limiting impact. It will still be very strong, but it will be transitioning very quickly. So the severe weather will transition very quickly. We could have, because it is such a large, broad, upper level warm sector with a low level warm sector with broad upper level winds, we could see several series of segments of thunderstorms and severe weather later on throughout this day and tonight. So I would agree right now. When we ran our model, our in-house model, right now we were showing a low tornado risk, well, basically around the Springfield area, we were showing a slight tornado risk, a slight severe thunderstorm risk. We changed some of those values later on for the forecasted values later today, and we saw a pretty solid enhanced risk in that area. Now, right now SPC is saying moderate risk. Again, we want to look at the parameters probably a little bit later today, and we'll keep you updated on our models, and we would expect that this would probably be pretty close to a moderate risk. We're pretty in agreement at this point in time, but we'll have to monitor how the parameters form later today. So we'll keep you up to date. We'll be doing live broadcasts. We'll have the live radar going on our Ustream site at dailyweatherbriefing.com. And then we'll keep you advised. So thank you for watching.